Well, this is the Canon, Reverend Michael Dean Vinson, and I am the Canon of Church Planting for the Diocese of Mid-America of the REC 100 Church Planting Initiative that began in 2017. I'm happy that you've joined us for another church planting conversation. And I'm really glad to have my friend and fellow priest, the Reverend Andrew Costa, with us today. And Andrew, how are you today?
Uh, People ask that, and when you're in a time of great transition, how do you respond? You just say fine.
Yeah.
And so I tell people like we're all onions, and there's layers to this onion that are fine, and layers of this onion that need significant attention. So yeah, I mean, what would I tell a stranger? I'm fine. What would I tell a friend? I'm an onion.
Right. Well, okay. I like that.
We
And
we can cut in. We can cut into this onion, but I might try.
well, for those of you who have joined us, this is a maybe a different type of conversation today than you might expect from our church planning conversations, but I think it's a very important one. As Father Andrew had planted uh, Drake County Anglican with him and his family, blood, sweat, and tears. And very recently, I believe, Father, within the last 20, 30 days, the church plant had made the decision under Andrew's leadership to basically conclude their efforts and to wrap up the mission, so to speak. And so today is a conversation, and again, as I think a very important one in the life of a church planter and the life of a church planting family, those that were drawn to a church plant. But what happens when the church plant doesn't work out and things don't go the way that you would hope they would, and you have to conclude, your efforts, painstaking efforts. And so we wanted to spend a little time with Andrew. He graciously offered to have this conversation with us today, and I appreciate your courage, brother. And I know this is near, so this isn't like you have a lot of distance from this. So I'm aware of that, and I do appreciate you taking the time to visit today. So maybe a place to start. Would you just give maybe a little bit of a short history of kind of the beginning and kind of, just what happened in planning the church? And let's get to the point where, things began to actually go the other way. How's that?
Yeah, absolutely. So like a lot of people around the time of COVID, were in various degrees of lockdown. I'm in a rural county. We weren't very locked down, but there was kind of a slowdown in traffic through my mind, and I got to kind of check the landscape. And I just, as I'd gotten deeper and deeper into informal and evangelical circles, where people love the Lord passionately, they didn't really have an overly developed sense of communion and what role it should play in the life of the believer.
Right.
And the ones who did usually kind of fell on like a symbolic communion um, place, and so there were some very theologically astute people who just weren't a place I wasn't.
Right.
But having grown up Roman Catholic, I don't completely buy the Roman Catholic premise of transubstantiation, but something's happening there. Like Luther and Calvin thought so, and those are two guys who I think quite a lot of.
Sure.
Um, and so it's like, I need to find friends who take communion seriously. Uh, I didn't know anything about the Reformed Episcopal Church, and I had a friend. We were having one of those lockdown conversations where we're 15 feet apart under an awning while it was raining.
Right. Yeah.
Because like I wasn't taking it too terribly seriously, just because we'd gotten so far from the initial lockdown stuff, and um, but one of the friends there really was, and he was trying to be careful, probably for the sake of his family.
Mhm.
Um, and he said, I'm surprised you haven't applied at this Reformed Episcopal Church. And it's like, there's this there's this magical place where people are Reformed and Episcopal at the same time.
Right. Like
And
you've never heard
I'm
of it before, right?
yeah, I'm finding out when I'm 40. Uh, I didn't know that there were conservative families moving away from the Episcopal Church and the Church of England. I should have assumed there were parallel families. I just didn't know they were out there.
Mhm.
And so the REC, which is a small denomination, had a unusually large footprint right in my backyard, the greater Dayton, Cincinnati area. And
Yeah, you're in
in doing
Ansonia.
so,
You're in Ansonia, Ohio, right? Yeah. So you're in
right,
Ohio.
which is
Right.
which is an exurb of Dayton. We're
Right. Okay.
50 minutes away. So like a lot of places in the Midwest, I'm 50 minutes away from Christ the King Parish, surrounded by corn and beans.
Right.
And if I drove the 50 minutes, I'd be in some of the most urbanized areas of Dayton, Ohio.
Mhm.
Um, and so, that kind of geography.
Mhm.
And so um, I started talking to the bishop, started using the Book of Common Prayer in my own devotional life. As a person with ADD, who'd been told his whole life, go do quiet times. It's like, I don't know what that is.
Right.
And everybody's got a different theory on what it should be. And finally, to have this morning and evening prayer, which is in harmony with, what the ancient church has done, different expressions of the ancient church, right? If you open the Lutheran hymnal, you'll find their version of it, find the Methodist hymnal, the Catholic breviary.
Sure.
We're all doing some kind of monastic thing.
Mhm.
And it was this, again, I was like, how did people wait 20 years into my Christian life to tell me this exists? This is incredible.
Yeah.
So we'd been in our community for 10 years. My wife grew up here. At that point, my father-in-law was the county commissioner. Like a lot of millennials, I was in this place where I bought a house 10 years ago under certain interest rates and prices. And now it's like, there's no way I could ever move out of this house.
Yeah.
So unless God woke us up with a dream, we're like, our one of our boundaries is going to be geography. But you can also plant a church. I mean, there's always opportunity to expand the kingdom missiologically through church planting, right? That's always an opportunity.
Yeah.
And so, the bishop got on board with the idea. I went through transferring my orders into the REC ACNA. And at this point, stuff started to move quickly and not quickly. The things that moved quickly were like, I'd get some big donations, and I worked for Young Life for years. I was never a good fundraiser.
Mhm.
Like in sales, I can make a person feel at ease and heard. I can't close. Like I can't say, so are we going to do this today? There's just too much risk for rejection. And when you're rejection averse,
That's the hard part. Closing's the hard part.
right. If you can close, God bless you. If you could close and get a no and get back in your car and shake it off, you
Right.
are something special, and the market is going to reward you.
Yeah.
But people started coming in to be supportive. Some of that's being 40 and just having a network, grew up demographically amongst well-to-do people. So I had some things in my favor.
Mhm.
I asked about the use of a building in Ansonia. Why did I choose such a rural spot? Well, there was a building available, and I thought, maybe 6 miles north of my house, people would probably come from my town of Greenville to there if we were to, if they were interested in the Anglican way. And the people who owned the building, like, we don't want to rent this to you. We want to give this to you.
Wow. Yeah, I remember. Yep.
And I was just like, like, this sounds like a sign from God. um, there was wise people on both sides in my diocese who said a church is not a building. It starts as a core team who believes a thing. And then other folks who said, sometimes the monastics would go to a geography and live a monastic existence,
Mhm.
and God would flourish something.
Right.
And so we were like, what, is God wanting to do kind of a monastic work here, or does he want us to say no and go to more traditional church plant of gathering a core team?
Right.
Trinity Connorsville had started with geography, and they're an hour away. So I was watching what Father Richard was doing there, and how God was just showing up in big ways. And I'm like, this could be an alternative way to plant churches, if we just give God the benefit of the doubt that He can do anything at any time. If we believe in the omnipotence of God, this might work. Yeah.
Sure. We're willing to roll the dice on that.
Yeah. And having lived in the community for 10 years, I thought, oh, well, I've got a huge network to draw on.
Mm-hmm.
Something will, some kind of core team will shake loose. And so I started trying to do the things that, like a Canon Tony Melton would recommend that you do. Just take any, sit with anybody who'll take a meeting, ask if they know of anybody they can, like,
Right.
I started I started an online presence and tried to make it as robust as I could, so people knew what was out there and what was going on.
Mhm.
Um, and so we launched our first Sunday, and I'd never really built a very strong core team that just never came together in a big bad way. But I was able to ask people that I know and love and say, "Hey, I know you have a home church. Could you visit for like the next 2 weeks and just put some bodies in the room for us?" Um, and some of my friends did, and
Mm.
so we had a pretty good first Sunday, less great second Sunday, but we started in Advent. Um, and if you look at your numbers for the last few years, Ken and Mike, I think you would find that Advent 3 and 4 are probably pretty low attendance Sundays,
Well,
and
yeah,
maybe
yeah, it's a
and
busy
maybe
time.
even yeah, and maybe even New Year's Sunday. That's just the time where people either power down, they travel.
Yeah.
Um, so one family showed up and like we had been exploring Eastern Orthodoxy. We found some things about it inaccessible, and it was recommended to us. If we still want to be in a liturgical setting, the Anglican Church might be a good place for you. And they're like, we've been waiting for an Anglican Church, and we're here.
Right.
And I was like, okay, so there's a family to walk alongside of us in this building. We have a church in um, Indiana donated all this beautiful altar furniture. So we had the two prayer desks with the kneelers and
Oh, yeah.
uh, yeah, like it looked like a church. Um, there wasn't a lot happening in January, but I was like, well, we just opened the doors and there's not a lot to happen. I'll just keep doing what I need to do. Um, and then these three connected families, so grandma, grandpa, their two kids and families, who I knew I'd been friends with for a long time, and they'd had some experiences in more informal church settings that had left them pretty tender.
Mhm.
Um, and I said, look, you're welcome to be here as long as you need to be, and in whatever way you need to be. Father Richard had reminded me that we can also hand somebody a prayer book and say, like, here's what's going to protect you. I can't ask you for anything that's not in here,
Right.
nor can you demand of me anything that's not in here. This is going to be a covenant between us, the prayer book.
Mm.
This is how we're going to pray the scripture together and be spiritually formed. Uh, and they just really like it. They're very interested in Judaism and the
Mm.
liturgical rhythms of Judaism, and
Yep.
so the liturgical rhythms of Anglicanism really drew them. Uh, some people from their family decided to get baptized, and so like uh, we were in Lent when that happened, and I said, well, let's wait for Easter or for Saturday before Easter because that's when the church traditionally did it.
Right.
So I'm setting up my first ever vigil, thinking what are you, 25, 30 people, 70, 60 people walked in. I didn't have enough pages printed,
Is that right?
and I'm like, the Easter vigil is the liturgical equivalent of a tailgating party. You're waiting
That's,
for the
I love
thing.
that. Can I steal that, by the way? That's fantastic.
Please do. It's one of six clever things I've ever said. Like I went over my organist. I'm like, we're going to do zero of the Psalms we plan to do. Like, this is no longer 2.5 hour service. This is now 1.5 hour service. Like,
Right.
these people have no idea
Right.
what is happening. One woman came up to me and she's like, "Can you take that smoking thing out of here?" I had my Thurible,
Yeah.
going, the sensor going.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yeah, you know what? She's never been here. She's no idea. I can at
Right.
least make this." And we did these baptisms. We did a, a visual esque, went right to Holy Communion, had a great Easter Sunday. And I was like, oh my gosh, look at all the neat stuff the Lord is doing. Um, Now, at this point, I started to get more nervous,
Mm.
um, because I knew that people leave church plants. They say 40%, or I'm sorry, 80% in the first 3 years and 100% turnover in your first 5 years. Like,
Yeah, I
you,
mean, it's very turbulent. I mean, I
yeah.
experienced that. A lot of people do. There's a lot of churn in a dynamic environment like that.
And you don't think it's going to happen to you. Like, I don't know about you, Father Mike, but I didn't think it was going to happen to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that aspect of you like, well, I know that this is normative and like this happens to everybody else, but there's a real high probability that it probably won't happen here. Yeah, we fall into that trap. I still fall into it.
Yeah. Well, and so I started, I'm like, we don't get guests. People don't pop in to visit us.
Yeah,
Um, every once in a while, they never came back. Uh, I'd even get former Episcopalians who'd come pop in, like, oh, the 28 prayer book, like, where have you been all my life?
right,
I'm
right.
like, great, this is gonna be great. And then, they never see him again. Um, and so we'd very few visitors. I'm like, if one of these three connected family leaves, they're not leaving alone. They will all leave.
Right.
They travel in packs. I've known them for 10 years. Um, and I'm like, wait, we are one bad phone call, something, something, something from a full church split here. We're 25 people, five families. It feels good and sustainable in the short term, but this isn't going to work in this current form. And at the same time, they were getting really excited about because we run so many things in parallel to our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters. They really liked some of the things they were getting off the internet from Roman Catholic apologists. And so the next few sentences I'm going to kind of spout off. And if you're from the Roman Catholic Church, I promise you I'm not trying to be pejorative or rude. Um, for years, the Protestant church was doing a lot of apologetics towards Catholics, to call them to the gospel of salvation by grace alone, through faith alone,
Right.
all for God's glory alone, right? And it, as a Calvinist, like those things are very important to me, but they're not the ultimate thing. Um, we can unite around ecclesiology, and we can unite around other gospel imperatives. Um, I'm not going to hold out the five solas and say, like, if you don't believe these five things, you're heterodox. Like,
Right. Sure.
just not ready to make that claim.
Sure.
But the Protestants were doing a lot of apologetics towards our Catholic neighbors, and and you could go to a lot of big mega churches and find a lot of formerly Catholic people. It was a very successful time, and I think some of that was kind of the shakeout of Vatican II and Catholics trying to figure out, like, who are we? What are we doing? What's our identity in a post Vatican II world?
Yeah.
Um, a lot of priests, Catholic priests my age, found their footing, became theologically curious, and have begun a apologetics towards Protestantism. And so, my joke is always like, look, you could get on YouTube right now and find 100 Catholic priests who all CrossFit. They look amazing. They're great with media. And then they're like, this week, why faith alone is not true. And, then give some apologetic why faith alone is not true.
Sure.
So these folks in my church are consuming these apologetics.
Absolutely.
They're getting into, like, the Hallow app, right? Every time you're on Facebook,
Yep.
it's like
Mhm.
Gwen Stefani, like, hey, come on the Hallow app and pray with me, or Marky Mark or Kevin J, like, huge names
Sure.
in celebrity circles. And I think the most famous Anglican I can think of right now is the guy who started Wikipedia.
Mhm.
And he's not done a Facebook ad yet. So they started consuming a lot of very parallel Roman devotional material.
Yeah.
And I didn't at that time imagine that they would get more serious about exploring the Roman Catholic Church.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, I think they're actually really starting to consider that would be where they'd want to land. And by the way, in my town, I have a good relationship with our Roman Catholic priests.
Yeah.
So I want to tread lightly, because I don't want to give a counter apologetic that, my Roman Catholic mother-in-law would be embarrassed to hear me say,
Sure.
or my friend Father Matt would be embarrassed to hear me say. So, I tempted to give my apologetic view on why I'm still on this side of the Protestant thing, and not, myself a
Right.
Roman Catholic.
Yep.
But I think at that point, it had just moved along too far. They were just too convinced, too excited, really excited about Eucharistic devotion, which is kind of an area of spiritual formation that was never big for me. So, they're going to a place, and as Lent started, they're like, we're starting RCIA. And I was
Yeah.
like, that's that's hard for me as the church planter, but people leave church plants.
Yep.
It happens, right? This is not Rome's fault.
Right.
This is statistics.
Sure.
Um, and so they this last year on Easter Saturday, made their confirmations, and so it left me and another family, um, and then a couple of friends who were coming. There was two other friends who were with us. But I mean, if my family had anything Sunday morning, we could be 7 people. It might be 11.
Mhm.
That feels way different than 25. When you're in a big church
Yeah.
doing the 1928 liturgy
Right.
in a chasuble, and there's 11 people in the room, like
Yeah.
that's not the easiest thing for the pastor. Like
Yeah.
we all have egos if we don't admit it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so to this point, so thank you for walking through that history. I think that gives our viewers, I think, a good context. It's a difficult reality in church planting, and even just within a parish life. You think about the forming and shaping aspects of media and the availability of it on demand, always there. And then you think about all that's going on that side in a person who's walking kind of from one tradition to another, right? So
Mhm.
all these people you're talking about, and we see this in a lot of our church plants. People are coming from another place traditionally, and they're making a journey towards us. But there's a lot of stuff going on, and it takes time for people to actually be solidified in their Anglicanism and Anglican identity. And it's not unusual for a person to have been looking at Rome, looking to the east, looking to the conservative Lutherans, because that's the journey they embarked on. They happen to then add us to the palette of paint that they're trying to color a picture for their spirituality. And we have, as church planters or priests, we have limited amount of contact with these people, right? We're not YouTube, so we're
Right.
not always available. And they have a pantheon of these disembedded authorities, and it doesn't matter that they don't know the priest that's speaking to them from Rome. They're just willing to assume that he knows what he's talking about because he's on YouTube. So there's this default authority that's given to these disembedded figures, and it's a really difficult, but it's a reality of catechizing and reaching people in our time. And so what you've just walked through, I mean, that's kind of the blocking and tackling of engaging and gathering people. So my point being, that's a road that many of us as planters have walked down. It's just in your situation with the fragility of the numbers of people that you were really a core group. That exit was really. Did you think at that time? I mean, is that when, Father, you kind of thought, okay, we're at a different place now, and your thinking started to shift? What then? How did you go from there to
Yeah.
making the decision to close the painful decision to close down the mission?
Yeah, because I've just got us to Easter, and that was
Right.
April, right? We're what October 23rd. Yesterday was an anniversary for me, so 22nd. Today's the 23rd. Um, so Easter that takes place, and I'm like, okay, I think we've got a geography problem here. Like having
Mhm.
this church building is such a beautiful gift. It's cheap to carry,
Yeah.
so if we want to try some other geography, um, that might be worth exploring.
Hmm.
Um, at the same time, I started needing to pay more attention to some things in my mental health, um, that were uh, starting to need more management, and that's going to be important because um, we're eventually going to get to this place we're going to decide to close, and part of it is um, I needed a minute as a human being to get my hands around a few things,
Yeah.
and so I just say that like this Easter thing happens. things are starting to be very complicated for me health wise. And now I'm like, do we move towards where I live, Greenville, Ohio, instead of 1,100 in Ansonia, we go 12,000 people in Greenville. Um, the United Methodist Church had like a side chapel they built for weddings and funerals that was built like an Anglican chapel.
Yeah.
I was like, we could do 1928 prayer book in here if people be
Yeah.
willing to
So I
come
mean,
here
you had
instead.
options, right? You had there. I mean, you're at this point, you're thinking, well, there's another way we could possibly do this. You could shift strategies and make
Yeah,
sense.
I had a person in a county over from us where there's like maybe around 250,000 people, and he was asking, could we plant something in my area? And actually, he ended up. I was about to call and be like, we should start exploring a plant in your area because of all the population. He's like, actually, I am joining the Roman Catholic Church on Easter Sunday. I was like, you too, all right. So like, even as I was exploring new geography,
Yeah.
the sands are kind of shifting under my feet. Um, we go through the summer, and finally, August comes, um, and I'm really having trouble just wrapping my hands around my health. Um, and as that's happening, that last family that was with us stayed friends with those other three families, and they're
Right.
like, we have not been watching YouTube. We've been reading the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and
Mhm.
we're convinced we're going to Rome. And so I'm like, man, it's at this point, it's me, my family, these two friends who come around, some more regularly than others. Um, but like, if I'm feeling this poorly, and we've had a complete turnover of any kind of core team without anybody coming in, um, and I didn't think we were on the precipice of anything.
Yeah.
You know, my wife's like, so what do you want to do? And I'm like, I think it's time to close the church.
Mhm.
And we went to a retreat together for the canons. And at that point, or not the canons, I'm sorry, you were there as a canon. I was just there as a church planner.
Yeah.
We went on a retreat for the church planners,
Right.
and our new bishop was like, I think it's time to close the church. I was like, oh, I'm glad you said it first. Um,
Mhm.
and so yeah, that is what's been unfolding the last 6 weeks is, you know, I've been able to get my hands around what I've been feeling in here.
Yeah.
But at the same time, uh, as my health is getting better, I'm suddenly also having to digest, uh, this grief, almost kind of like a death in a family.
Yeah, you just
You
brought
know,
up grief. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I've thought about and prayed, since the retreat when this was you kind of made I saw you affirm that decision by the bishop and we knew this is where it was going to go for you. The Lord was leading you guys into this, bringing closing it down and then opening up to what's next. As I've prayed and thought about you, grief is the word. I mean, maybe can you share just a little bit, a few minutes, like what is the experience? Because I think this is really important for people because I think what you'll share is not going to be an anomaly for anyone that's going to potentially be in the same predicament. So if I mean, if you're
yeah,
comfortable sharing.
no, absolutely. First of all, let me recommend. Uh, I've never Googled it. Maybe it exists, but I've never seen a book that says, when it's time to close your church plant. Maybe I should write it, with the help of AI, because I'm a slow typer.
Right.
Um, but let me highly recommend, what Bishop Jason Grote recommended me was a book called, The Honest Guide to Church Planting by Tom
Yeah.
DiNardo.
Yeah, that's a good book.
Um, and he's got chapters in there. It's not going to go how you think it's going to go, kind of
Yeah.
chapters. And so when he got to the statistics of church plant success, he couldn't figure out. He said he quoted everything from 80% of church plants close, half of them we don't know the numbers. I thought it was 80%. I thought it was 4 out of 5.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember in the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast, they had a whole episode about how you have to be a little bit crazy to do this. You
Yeah.
just got to really believe some things, that you're special, that you're not in that 4 out of 5. You really got to believe that you're not going to have 100% turnover, um, and just kind of charge forward at things. And maybe some people are more thoughtful and careful about it. But when I look back, I'm like, yeah, maybe you do got to be a little bit crazy to be a church planner. I didn't believe it when I listened to the podcast, and now I was like, I wasn't always 100% rational when I thought about what it would take to be successful early on.
Mhm.
So when we come to the grief, like I had not really prepared for myself for this might happen. Like I'm
Who
in a phase in
does?
like,
I mean, who does?
yeah,
Like I don't. I mean, in one sense, you can't. As a planter, you can't think rationally in that sense. Like you don't get up on day one and say, "Well, I'm going to go start gathering people and plant a church, and here's my other plan if it doesn't work." Like for me personally, like I've had to force myself to not think that way. So I totally get that. I don't think you can be both. When you're trying to build anything and to do something that quote unquote is a bit crazy. So I just wanted to share that, but please.
no, absolutely, yeah. I mean, you got to believe you're 9 foot tall and bulletproof. You as much as your morning run might convince you otherwise. Um,
Yeah, right.
I haven't run in a while. There's no wildlife to chase me in this area, so so the grief of it. When I decided like this is going to be our last Sunday, this will be our farewell Sunday. And I didn't even make a big stink of it because I'm like, I mean, there's 7 of us who are connected to this church plant. Like, like it'll be for us 7. And I actually found a few people who had visited who wanted to be there for the farewell, and so it was a nice Sunday. And my adrenaline was just kind of through the roof as it is on Sunday. I don't know how other pastors are, but on Sunday morning, it's like, will the sound work? Will this work?
Right.
Do we have enough communion wafers? And so we got through the service, and like I just hadn't grieved a lot yet.
Yeah.
Um, and I tell people like when I do a funeral and those sorts of things, I'll say the advice given to me has been on on the week of your loved one's funeral, you don't grieve. You're just too busy making phone calls, flights, hotels.
Yep.
In like 2 weeks, something's going to happen. A tire is going to go flat, or the dishwasher is going to break, or your washing machine's going to start leaking onto your hardwood floor, and you're just going to melt.
Yes, it's gonna come, it's gonna blow out. Yeah.
Yeah, because that bottled up grief is going to.
Yeah, sure. That's
So
right.
I'm sitting there in like shock mode of like I'm not feeling anything, um, and I'm watching my family in grief. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're really feeling something here, and
Hmm.
I feel like a robot. Um, and then as we came up to, I got to get this building ready for somebody else to take it over. That's when it was like somebody gave me this chalice. Here's the story of my chalice.
Hmm.
Somebody gave me this paten. Here's the story of my paten. And then I started to grieve all these little things. Look at this stack of 1662 prayer books that I got from this church planter.
Hmm.
Look at this, look at this, look at that, look at that,
Right.
and just a thousand little cuts of grief.
Hmm.
And it's like I'm in the building right now, and I'm choking up a little bit. I'm like, it's hard to be in this. I have to get all these books back to my home office.
Right.
It's not a hard task. I've packed and unpacked books before, but like it's going to be emotionally just
Well, sure.
explosive.
But
Um,
I mean, all those things matter because they're invested with your life and the life of your family. Those things, it's like it would be like grieving the death of a child. Like all those things mean something far greater because of what they represent in that story of your life of planning that church. And I would be concerned if those things didn't matter to you. That just goes to show the love that you have, that you poured into not only that place and that the beauty of that building and trying to and not trying but making it a house of worship for God and actually glorifying God in a sanctified place, that's the intention of that church. That matters more than anything. It all means something, and you're connected to everything. So it makes perfect sense.
yeah, I wonder, when you move, it's been so long that I moved out of the house that my first kid I brought home to. I wonder if there's a similar grief in those moments.
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
yeah, because you're connected to all the things tell a story. And it's good to remember, Ken and Michael, that uh, the grief is a sign that I'm going to be okay. Like I'm it's a sign that I'm emotionally healthy, because an emotionally healthy person should
Well,
grieve.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Well,
Um,
yeah. So, wow, thank you for that. Uh, I want to, you mentioned the recognition of your family. Um, you said, I saw, wow, they have been impacted as greatly as I have, And when you're in the midst of something that is significant and all consuming as like a church plant, and not only the plant, I'm talking about people, whether it's 7 people or 700 people, you're invested in the household of God, but you're also the priest of your home. It's not always an easy road to walk as a priest or a deacon or a bishop, especially as a church planter. But maybe if you want to share, I mean, just because I think it's important for people to just have a sense of these things happen to family, the families, church planting family. They don't just happen to the planter. So,
yeah.
what can you maybe share that would be helpful for other planters or families that are maybe are in this facing this possibility even now?
Yeah. It was hard for my 3 kids because they're younger. They're right now 13, 11, and 8.
Hmm.
When we left, the only thing they'd ever known was low church evangelicalism.
Right.
Um, and so when we came over to this, um, they were kind of like stunned. Like, what are we doing?
Mm.
This isn't even in English that I speak. Um, and so, my wife and I have been raised Roman Catholic and having liturgical tools in our tool belt.
Right.
Um, None of this was terribly weird. And for them, everything was odd.
Hmm.
Um, and so I kind of gave them permission to digest it at whatever pace they need to digest it at. Like
Sure.
I needed to run ahead. Um, and then throughout my ministry, um, my wife's just always been very mindful and thoughtful about what's going on in our domestic sphere and keeping that ship running as I work on the ministry sphere. Um, and we're just in this busy stage of life where like
Yeah.
this was really taking so much of her. And so when she did do things with with the church plant, she did the things she could, but it really was a lot of these things were falling to me.
Yeah.
Or I would go into anxiety mode and be like, I got to take this off her plate because there's so much to do at home.
Yeah.
Um, that when it came time to close, I didn't realize how much they had given,
Mm.
and how much like I thought this was kind of like my grief to bear, and we'll figure out where they're going to church next. And I didn't quite understand, the cost it had been for them.
Mm.
So what advice could I give to somebody who might be there? I actually don't know that I have anything universal to say.
Sure.
I wish I had slowed down. Um, I had left a youth ministry job where I was um, uh, well taken care of by the church. I have a master's degree. I was part of the pastoral staff, um, and they really cared for me in that way, financially, emotionally, just in all the spheres.
Sure.
So when we went into church planning, I was in a rush because I just walked away from um, my end of the household economy into this thing, and I'm like, I need to get this thing up and running
Yeah.
so I can start raising money at least, and was really trying to avoid going back into the secular workforce and then on the side um, becoming a priest. And um, sometimes I feel like we do this. Uh, we take somebody who's working a regular, 40, 50, 60-hour a week job, depending where they are, and they say, you would be great in the ministry area.
Hmm.
Um, have you ever considered becoming a deacon? And then we say, well, here's the diaconal process. And it's a pretty big process.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot from them,
Hmm.
which is like, so when they're working, they're not with their family. And now when they're participating in diaconal formation, they're not with their family more. And then maybe they move into the priesthood, but they're not necessarily on the staff of the church. Like
Yep.
just whatever those arrangements are.
Right.
We always, not always, we will often take our candidates um, into a place of time commitment and emotional commitment before we might catch up with them and bring them on vocationally.
Mm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and then I don't think we always consider what that means for their families.
Right.
And so I was trying to avoid that. I was trying to go from this ministry into that ministry without a
Again.
really challenging,
Yeah.
without a really challenging transitional period.
Sure. Right.
Um, and so I was running it just as hard as I could, and I was getting way ahead of uh, the people who loved me.
Mm.
And so that left some unhealthy dynamics within the church plant um, that also led to its closing. Um, that we'll have to spend some time unwinding and repairing.
Yeah.
So there's so much Christian devotion out there talking about like God's timing and slowing down and being patient, and God's timelines are not our timelines.
Hmm.
And for the love, we learned this lesson so slow. Like how many times do we have to hear the preacher say God's timing is not yours? How many times do we have to talk about the patience of Abraham, or the 40 years wandering in the desert, or Jesus waiting till he was 33 to begin his, but how many times do we have to hear that sermon preached
Yeah.
before we slow down and say, you know, what is God's timing on all this?
Yeah.
Um, and so I don't know how to help people fix anything that's going on right now.
Oh, sure. Sure.
But what I could advise somebody to not get here is the slower you move, the better. It all feels glacial, and still I would tell you slow down.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great word. And I think the reason why one of the gifts of a 1 year lectionary in the the 28 prayer books and the older prayer books is that we need to hear these things to answer your question. We need to be told, especially in our time and age and the way we're wired in modernity. I mean, patience, long suffering, waiting on God. I mean, I know I can't hear it enough, but
And I think the business world has really impacted us in this way. If you're going to start a tech startup, um, you spend a lot of money and effort on the front end
yeah,
to be able to scale big,
right,
right? So if you start an Airbnb and it's $15,000 a month to operate, and then you go to angel investors and you say, here's our business model, here's our growth projections, and they say, hey, we love it, we want 20%, and here's $1.5 million.
yeah,
You don't say, all right, how long can we do 15,000 a month before we run through our 1.5 million? They say, how do we quickly spend
yep,
$1.5 million to be big enough
right,
so that when we're big, we can handle it?
yeah,
And I think that there is some bleed over into the church planning world of like, how do we raise a lot of money to um, to be big, or to be scaled and ready to scale on
right,
that front end,
yeah,
so that as people arrive, so like I had my building, my vestments, my altar furniture, um, and my programs like right away, so that if 30 people walked in, we were ready for that reality.
sure,
Um, and trying to make it look that way on like our Facebook, YouTube, those sorts of things. And that is not that is the economy of the modern American tech industry,
yeah,
and it's working. Those guys are doing great.
yeah,
That's not a monastic economy. That's not Levitical economy. That's not
kingdom
uh,
economy.
yeah. That's not God's economy.
Yeah, yeah, that's wise. Well, maybe, well, first of all, I mean, again, it takes a lot of courage to, I mean, you initiated the conversation with me, would you want to have this conversation? And I'm thinking, of course, I want to have this conversation. Um, so I want to thank you for that, number one. Um, maybe as a last thought, and if you don't have perspective yet, that's fine because, perspective needs time. But I mean, do you see, have you perceived what good or goods did or has God done or is now you see he's doing through this whole arc of the story that you've told? And if there's nothing
Yeah,
you can see right now, that's fine. But I wanted to just ask the question.
out of an emergency situation last week, I was covering the pulpit for my very good friend who's a Lutheran, and they're on a 3-year lectionary, and their Old Testament lesson was Jacob wrestling with God.
Yeah.
Um, and I really like Timothy Keller and his hermeneutical process on reading, digesting scripture, presenting it. So I was interacting with some things he had done on the story of Jacob and how um, Jacob wrestled in the womb. Jacob wrestled away the birthright from his brother. He swindles his dad. He wrestles with his uncle twice, both for his wives and then for the life. He
Right.
spent his whole life wrestling and out of self, uh, out of his own strength, getting what he was after,
Yeah.
no matter the cost. And then he wrestles with God, and he cannot prevail.
Mm.
Um, and God even breaks his hip. Um, and for being willing to wrestle with God and to do that, God does give him the blessing that he's been looking for.
Mm.
And Jacob's somewhat of a changed person in the second part of Genesis, but he always limps, right? Um, and so there's many times in the life of a cleric where you're going to wrestle with God and come out limping. This will probably be one of my most significant
Mm.
ones you know, uh, where I was holding up onto God and I was like, "There's a thing I want, and I really want it," and God um, had to through pain uh, give me the thing that I actually needed, and so
What is that thing? Do you know?
um, I didn't realize how much I just had never solidly formed identity outside of my vocation and my place in my household.
Mm.
Uh, that uh, that I'd been really looking to those things almost as idolatries.
Mm.
And when my vocational thing, the church closes, and then I realize what it's costed in my household, and realize like I wasn't good at either of these things. Like I was not. Uh, I was serving these idols. They were giving nothing back.
Mm.
Um, at least nothing healthy. Um, and it was pulling my devotion away from God. And that's to say, like when I say my family's an idolatry, it didn't give me anything good back. Of course, my family gives me a million good things back.
Well, sure. I know what you
Um,
mean.
yeah, but like there's only one thing meant to satisfy your soul. As Augustine said, you've made every heart for yourself, O Lord, and there is no rest for the restless heart until he finds his rest in thee.
Right.
Um, yeah, I used to quote that Augustine quote all the time, and now suddenly I'm like, well, why didn't I believe it? Because now I need that Augustine quote every day. So,
So you've wrestled with God, and you two now are being made into a different man.
by his mercy, you know, by his mercy when he takes things away from you, and you're like,
Well,
why? And then you realize it was absolutely his mercy.
yeah. Well, that's powerful. And God's not done. He's not done with you. He's not done with your family. He's not done. I mean, you're a gifted priest, a gifted man. I'm glad that I call you my friend. But God's doing some deep work right now. It's painful, but He's doing the most significant things in our lives is typically associated with that is the most significant pains, but it's for our good. So I appreciate your time, my brother.
Well, I appreciate you and I appreciate this podcast. And when things were hard, you were in the people I called because what you did at St. Benedict's was a model that I thought was worth um, the monastic model. I thought you guys really did something beautiful with that, and I wanted to do something similar. So thanks for your ministry there. I can't remember what city in Texas you're in.
Rockwall, Texas.
Rockwall, Texas.
Yep. Well, we'll say a prayer for us and then we'll conclude. Father of mercies and Father of grace, we thank you for having called us into your vineyard uh, in the unique ways that you call each man as a planter, in the unique way that you call each family who is given to you in devotion and mission. And thank you, God, for the good that you have done through Andrew's ministry. Thank you for those lives that he has touched and continues to reach. And maybe even more, Lord, through the witness of walking through this great trial with you. So nothing is wasted, Lord, in your kingdom. So I pray, God, that you would heal and bind and strengthen Andrew and his family. I pray, God, also that you would give him peace and just restore him. But also, Lord, continue to fashion him into the man that you are desiring he would be for the mission you've called him to. And so we ask your blessing upon him. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Amen.
Well, thanks everyone for joining another church planting conversation. And if you are mindful to think of Father Andrew and his family, to keep them in your prayers. And but we're also anticipating the next chapter in his life and ministry. And so until the next time, we look forward to seeing you again on the REC 100 Church Planting Conversations. God bless.